Be seen, be heard, be remembered. Online events bring the world together. And the replays just go on forever.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Storytelling Journey, where voices rise, stories unfold, and transformations begin. Today, I'm joined by Serena Low, founder of Introverts Around the World and creator of the Visible Introvert Academy. Serena is a confidence coach, speaker, and mental health practitioner who helps quiet achievers step out of hiding and into their power. Not by changing who they are, but by upgrading how they see themselves. We'll explore how identity evolves, how introverts can lead in a quiet strength, and how storytelling becomes a tool for healing, influence, and visibility. So whether you're tuning in live or catching the replay, this episode is for anyone who's ever felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated, and is ready to rise. Serena, welcome to the show. I am excited that you could join us. It is Friday morning for you in Melbourne, Australia. Before I allow you to introduce yourself, let me introduce my co-host, Jay Pasqua. Jay, welcome, my friend. Jay's the storytelling strategist and author of The Rules of Engagement in Storytelling. How you doing?
Doing good, Mariko. Thanks again for allowing me to be your co-host. What we do here and what I do is try to help folks tell their story. And we here on this program, we want people to engage with us and not just hear the story of our guests, but hear your story and how it can help us understand storytelling in general and how we can help each other. And so I'm always for discussion and engagement. That's how we learn, right? And really, to me, storytelling allows us to do all of this together. It's at the core of every bit of what we do as human beings when we communicate with one another. So I'll shut up because I'm not the focus. It's our guest.
Well, thank you. Bring Serena's overlay up again. Serena, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me here.
Well, it is a pleasure. We enjoy, we were talking about this before we went live. We are in different geographies. We share different skills, different points of expertise. But the one thing we all have in common is we enjoy helping people and enjoy being part of their narrative and bringing them along and giving them the power and the ability to tell their story with their communities. So I want to take a moment before we dive in. If you're joining us live, we are multi-streaming across LinkedIn, YouTube, as well as Substack. Now, if you have any questions along the way, feel free, drop them in the comments. We will try to keep up with the comments and questions and try to answer them in real time and have Serena engage with those who are joining us. All right. Serena, tell us a little bit about who you are, and I will jump into the questions. But first, why don't you set the stage for us?
Okay. So I work with introverted women leaders and founders who want to be seen and influential, but not in the usual way of having to put themselves out there and fake extroversion. So this is really about if you are by nature a quiet person, you're used to being the quiet achiever, how do you then elevate yourself to become something more, to be memorable, but without having to perform? And I think that is the the missing piece, I think, for a lot of introverts and quiet achievers when asked, when given a lot of advice, traditional advice, to put themselves out there, to step out of their comfort zone. How do you do that when it doesn't feel safe to be visible? So that's what I explore with my clients.
That is fascinating. And I'm sure we're going to dive into it with a lot more detail. And just going to bring us up on stage. Why don't we get comfortable here? All right. All cozy, all comfy. Let's dive in and start with some questions. Thank you for setting the stage with your introduction. And I'd like to maybe walk into or step into a little bit about introverts. And let's make this a simple question. How do you know if you're an introvert or not? Are there characteristics, or is it different for everyone?
I would say it can be quite context dependent, Americo, but the definition that I resonate with most is the one in Susan Cain's book, Quiet, and that is to do with energy management. So usually you can tell who the introvert is, let's say when you go to a party, and that's the person that does well with one-on-one conversations, one to a few people that they're comfortable with. But if you put them in a room full of strangers and they have to make small talk, and there's also a lot of stimulation going on, loud music, bright lights, and so on, they very quickly get uncomfortable. So there's also an overlap between introverts and people who are highly sensitive, and one is not necessarily the other, but I see a lot of overlaps. So with the introvert, what happens is their social battery gets drained very quickly when they're around people. Now, this is not to say that they are shy necessarily. They may or may not be. It doesn't mean that they're socially anxious necessarily or that they're antisocial. It just means that their energy gets depleted when they are talking with people, where it's like it's an expense of energy. And they recharge their social battery by going away by themselves, being in their little bubble, reading a book, going for a walk in nature, being very quiet, and just enjoying their own company. And in contrast, an extrovert would be someone whose social battery gets charged up every time they are with people. And it can be strangers, it can be, anyone. The more the merrier. And that's how they get their energy. And then for them, it could be very uncomfortable to be by themselves. They wouldn't quite know what to do with themselves. So it's like a yin and yang thing. And I also like to point out that there is another group called ambiverts, and they are in between. So they have a greater agility going up and down that spectrum. So an example would be someone who loves presenting, loves being on stage, loves talking to people, but they also recognize that after a certain point, they start to get depleted. They need to go away and recharge. But while they are on stage, while they are in front of people, while they are, front and center, they are having a great time. So that's a quick overview of the differences.
Jay, does any of that resonate with you? Do we have you, Jay?
Absolutely, it does. I used to think I was an introvert, um, but not by choice, but by profession, I had to learn to become an extrovert. And now that I think about it, an omnivert, in certain circumstances, I think that I want to be reserved and conservative and move away from the crowds. Um, but in other circumstances, I push myself out there so that I can have conversations that matter, right? And when you tell stories, you can't just tell a story to yourself, otherwise that you don't have any impact. And so for me, it was really important that I engaged with people. And I think that's at the core of what we're really talking about is how we engage with others, right? And the environments that allow us to do that. Do we, and so maybe we can look at this. Do we create those environments? Is that how we figure out who we are as introverts, extroverts, omniverts?
That is fascinating. I too thought I was an extrovert, but it turns out that I am a ambivert because I do enjoy the stage, the spotlight, leading, supporting, and developing others, and that really stokes me doing it in real time. But I also appreciate the time to step away and recharge. Now, I would call myself, when it comes to the recharging piece, I don't need much time. I'm very spontaneous. If I'm recharging because I made that decision yesterday and someone decides to reach out and say, hey, I need your help, I will put that recharge aside and drop what I'm doing and get back on my horse and help someone else, or soapbox, or whatever it is that we define ourselves getting up on. So it's fascinating. I'm sure you have some fantastic stories, examples that you're going to help us understand and appreciate what it is that you do and how others might be open to reaching out and getting support. So let's ask you questions. I think it's a great segue. So you describe yourself as someone who helps quiet achievers upgrade their identity. What's that transformation look like, and why is it important today?
Great question. So I like to describe it as the journey of a quiet achiever who then becomes a quiet warrior. Now, Americo, you also mentioned the importance of being able to put aside your own, let's say, your own recharge to be able to help someone who comes to you. So that's very values driven. It sounds to me like one of your values is being helpful, being useful, being there for other people, being in service. And that is part of the quiet warrior ethos as well. So, what I invite quiet achievers to consider is sometimes it is not about ourselves. In fact, the introvert is very often not good at putting themselves at the forefront when it's a matter of stepping up. But they may be willing to step up, they may be willing to speak up if it's in service of something other than themselves. For instance, it's for somebody else's benefit, or it's for a cause that they are aligned with, a purpose that feels meaningful to them. So they feel connected emotionally to that thing or that person, and they realize then, I have to say something about this situation. I can't just sit on the fence and be safe, because if I don't say anything, this person is going to remain unheard. Their voice is not going to be heard. That cause is not going to be spotlighted. People are not going to get the help they need. So when it becomes bigger than about yourself, that's when you have the opportunity to become the quiet warrior. And what is a warrior? A warrior has courage. A warrior is able to stand up, in a time of pressure, in a time of performance, and be able to do the thing that is difficult to do, that other people would say, I'm not going there, it's too hard. But they will say, I feel like a very small person, very ordinary person. Maybe I'm not as talented as, other people, but I'm willing to do the hard thing in this moment. And a very good example would be, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, when the ordinary hobbit who just goes about minding his business every day is suddenly invited on this great adventure and then has to undertake something that could be very dangerous, very risky, never stepped out of his hometown before, and has to go on this long journey and face demons and dragons and all sorts of monsters. And that is that hero's journey. And so that is that journey from being the quiet achiever who's just in the background, keeping the head down, doing their work, hoping that maybe somebody will notice me because I'm doing good work. And if I just keep doing it, eventually I'll get recognized. But then this is about something more. It could even be more than about the professional advancement. It could be about a cause that's bigger than ourselves. And then that's when it's important. Can I rise to the occasion when I'm called upon? Or will I just say, I'm an introvert. I can't do networking. I can't do small talk. Don't ask me to do public speaking. So that's the difference.
Fantastic. Now, speak on the point of public speaking. Now, we're not going to have, for instance, guests joining us on stage today, but from a public perspective and a public lens, I want to pause here for a second and welcome those who are joining us in the audience, listening in. Say hello to Brian, Zakia, Pete as well. Well, hi Jay, you're in the comments here. Keith is also joining us. Welcome Noni, Dr. Roxana, Lisa, 2 Lisas here. Welcome both Lisas. I mentioned earlier that we are multi-streaming. It would appear, and maybe someone can double check, it would appear that I do not see the feed on Substack. Now, doesn't mean that we're not going to repurpose and broadcast if we're having difficulties. But for those who are with us live, if you have questions, feel free to drop them. Once again, drop your questions for Serena in the comments, and we'll be sure to get those comments and questions looked at. What I did fail to do at the beginning of the show, and I'm not going to overlook it, I'm going to take a moment now, and I did verbally welcome Serena, but I did forget the effects. So welcome. Okay, back to the stage, back to regular scheduled programming, and we'll jump into our next question. Now, you talk about the idea of identity upgrade. What does that mean? What can you share for someone who's always seen themselves as that quiet achiever?
Okay, so identity upgrade can happen in several ways. Now, I think you mentioned earlier on about someone being an introvert always and whether that can change. Yes, it can change over time. I've spoken with people who say they were extroverted when they were younger and then they became introverted because of something that happened. And usually that something was quite traumatic. So it altered their personality. And I've also spoken with introverts who say they are now former introverts. So they identify as either ambiverts or extroverts. And like Jay mentioned, you can be an extrovert not by choice, but by profession because your job requires it. Now, my first career was as a lawyer, and I used to have to attend court. And most lawyers I have encountered are on the extroverted side. And I was probably the odd one out. Very quiet, very much of a quiet achiever, right? Just leave me to do my work and don't make me talk unnecessarily, and we'll be right. Now that works until it doesn't. So it's again very context dependent. Is it helping you? Is it serving you? If being a quiet achiever is okay, it's not harming you in any way, it's not making you, feel like you are disadvantaged in some way, then by all means, continue. But what we're talking about is flexibility. We want to be able to rise to the occasion when needed. We want to be able to access that courage, that resilience, that strength, that speaking ability, the ability to influence and impact others when necessary. And that doesn't necessarily mean I have to become extroverted. It just means how do I communicate in such a way that there is impact, that it's memorable, that it seeds a positive ripple effect, that it helps someone, that transforms someone's life. So part of that requires the identity upgrade, because if I'm always thinking, let me stay small, let me take up as little space as possible, let me try to be invisible and hope nobody looks at me. Coming from that kind of energy, it's very difficult to convince other people to look at you, work with you, collaborate with you, or sign on to your cause. You do need some kind of platform, some kind of presence, some kind of initial personal impact that draws people to want to have that conversation with you. So that is the work of moving away from simply being a quiet achiever to being someone who is more, who can communicate appropriately. And that's a skill. A skill can be learned. We don't all start off with the same set of skills. We don't all know how to communicate in a way that we need to, but we can grow, right? There is a growth mindset. If you're open to it, you're willing to work at it and learn from others, you do get better over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but you do see changes over years.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to lean on both of you to step in and share your thoughts and insights. So Keith shares with the community, if it works, keep doing it. So here's something. At first I thought I was an extrovert, and I still believe if I were to put it on the scale, I tilt more to the extrovert than anything else. But can you be an extrovert in person and not so much in writing? You refer and make reference to the quiet achiever. And similarly, I used to make reference and still make reference to it today. I used to be a keyboard warrior, a lot of passion, and my extroverted thoughts would hit the keyboard, but it wouldn't resonate. Or maybe it was resonating and I wasn't getting the same dopamine hit that extroverts require, that energy. And I shifted and I pivoted to this audible presence, this visual presence on camera and getting in front of people in real time. And all of a sudden I felt like I was at home. Now, from a storytelling perspective, curious and anxious to hear Jay's thought. And Serena, if you can add to that.
Yeah, the way that I see things, again, imagine yourself, right, who you thought all your life you were an introvert. And then you were thrust into a field where you had to be an extrovert. So much so that the people you met up with were politicians, were leaders, were lawyers in big, big cases, criminal cases that were on TV and on the radio and everywhere else at the time. And so that was me. I was a kid, literally right out of high school, interning at a news station. And I was thrust into this world. I thought I was going to be the guy behind the scenes, writing stuff. That didn't happen. Now, I will tell you, there was a traumatic experience that occurred. And it was as a result of a lack of training. And here's what happened. I was in the studio. There was a need for somebody to go on air on the radio and read the reports that were already written out. What happened was I was the intern and nobody, not one reporter was around, and I was forced to go on the air. And I read it like, I'll read this. Keith's the kind of sound guy who's made silence sound on the internet. You don't just hear music, but when he's around, you hear complete. And the DJ at the radio station tore into me. At the end of it, he said, "Say this. This is a thing that we do here at the radio station. It's an exercise for our DJs. We want them to speak and announce everything properly. Do this with me. Say red light, yellow light, green light, go. 10 times fast." And I laughed. And I was about to turn off my mic. And he said, "No, you're not going anywhere. Stay right where you are and do it with me. Red light, yellow light, green light, go, and do it 10 times fast." I was horrified. And I acquiesced. I gave in. I said, "Okay, let me do it." And I did it, and I sounded like a fool. And he said, "We'll talk more." And then he clicked off his mic, and that was it. And I was like, stunned. So there was definitely some stumbling blocks in my growth, right? And sometimes, it's that sink or swim mentality in some industries. And if you don't have it, you don't have it, or you do have it, and we're going to beat it out of you. And I'm hoping, right, that people don't have to go through that anymore, and that people like Serena are there to assist and coach folks who are in the industries that require you to have those bits of engagement that are going to be impactful. And so it's good to hear that there are these systems that people can be a part of that can help them reach the people that they need to reach.
Serena.
Yes. I picked up a few elements from what Jay is talking about. And one question I would ask is, am I being true to myself or am I performing? When I'm put in a situation where I'm asked to do things that are not me, like that red light, green light, yellow light, go thing, I would laugh as well. I would be quite flummoxed. I wouldn't, I would feel like I'm being put on the spot, I'm being ambushed, and I'm not very sure where this is going and what's the purpose of this whole thing. And that would be a hindrance in a moment where you are under pressure, there is a deadline, there is a requirement to act fast. The introvert doesn't do very well with that kind of thing. And that's because the introvert's brain is wired towards structure. We like to be prepared. We don't wing it. We don't go into a situation where we are completely caught off guard and we have to make up something on the spot. That's not our genius zone, right? And I've noticed extroverts can be really, really good at that. And that's a great asset to have when you're under pressure. But for somebody who's a quiet achiever, if you put them in a spotlight without notice, that's when they feel really threatened. So this is a safety issue, psychological safety, psychosocial safety. How do you create that safety for yourself when you are the quiet achiever, when you are the introvert, put into the spotlight very suddenly, asked to say a few words very suddenly? That's part of what this work is about. How do you then rise to the occasion? How do you calm yourself internally without making it too obvious that you are taken by surprise? How do you find something to say? How do you make sure that what you say is relevant, it's helpful? And there are many techniques for handling situations like that. But I just wanted to mention, first of all, the safety aspect and also the differences between how different personalities respond when put under pressure.
Fantastic. I did learn, and now I have an exercise. Red light, yellow light, green light, go. Listen, I talk about and I help people stop overthinking going live. And that was an exercise for you to kind of just calm you down, bring your heart rate down, and just get you to focus on the vernacular. It's just slow down. Now, Keith shares extroverts feel empty when they're alone. Can either of you relate?
Oh, sometimes, but sometimes I enjoy the silence. to be honest, I've got so much chaos going on sometimes that I just want to go, off to the corner. And it's like I said before, in instances where I need to be out there shaking hands, kissing babies, right? Like politicians, stuff like that. Then yes, I'm gonna be out there. But sometimes I just want to enjoy my coffee or my cup of tea in silence in my office. Or now that I work at a nature center, I'm literally in a golf cart in the woods, and it's beautiful, right? So, but I can see where and a true extrovert can feel empty, right? They want to share their latest story with somebody. They want to enjoy the other person's company, right? And that return, that feedback loop that storytellers enjoy, right? I share a story, they give me theirs, and then we're both communicating about this event or about maybe something as mundane as the next Netflix show. Like just recently, my wife and I were watching this series called Boots, and it's based off of a story about a man who becomes a United States Marine, and it's dramatic. It's highly dramatic, and so, but and it's these types of stories and these types of communications that extroverts long for. I can see that because it's their way that they communicate. It's their way of being, right? So at least that's what I see.
I agree with Jay. So, extroverts, as I see it, they thrive very much on that interpersonal connection that feeds their soul. And the introvert is just the opposite. So, during the pandemic, and Keith can back me up on this, Melbourne was one of the most locked down cities in the world, possibly the most locked down. And we weren't allowed to go anywhere within 5 kilometers, and only for very specific reasons. So during that time there were a lot of stories of how people who thrive on connection became really isolated and couldn't deal with that, right? And it affected my extroverted friends a lot more than the introverts. But having said that, even the introverts, and that includes myself, noticed that after an extended period of not being able to connect with people, with family, with friends, or even just to go out and be among people, we started to feel the effects of that isolation as well. So I would say all of us need that social connection, but we need it to different degrees. The introvert can manage a lot better when by themselves. They are happy for long hours, for days without talking to anyone. Some members of my introvert community tell me they can go for days without going out of the house, and they're perfectly happy. They're not distressed or anything like that. They don't feel isolated. They don't feel cut off. They're just completely contented. So it's different. It's a matter of extent, I believe.
So here's an interesting comment that Keith shares. Introverts are our secret heroes. And I agree, because they're very often not thought of. They are quiet warriors, as you point out, Serena. I think it ties in really nicely to our next question. And the question is, it's actually more of an ask than a question. Can you share a moment when you felt that you were called out of hiding? You talked about your days at the law firm. Were there ever any moments where you were called out of hiding? And how did you find the courage to rise to that occasion as an introvert?
I can remember one particular occasion, being asked to MC what was the ceremony? It was the inauguration of a new regulatory agency. So I was working in public service as a lawyer, and it was my job to welcome the VIP, the minister, and all that. And I remember this moment standing at that podium, looking slightly down, at everyone who was there waiting for the VIP to arrive, and then watching the VIP as they came up that red carpet. And it was a surreal moment because all along I had made it a, my mission to be in the background. I enjoy being behind the scenes, doing the hard work from a supportive, number two kind of position. I never enjoyed being in the spotlight. And so for me, that temporary moment of being in the spotlight, being asked to introduce people and, keep the program going and all that, that felt uncomfortable. But funnily, there was also a moment where it started to feel, wow, I can do this. I'm not naturally a spotlight seeker, or who thrives on being on stage, but when I have to, I actually have the words, and I have the flow, and I have the confidence, and I have the presence for this. So that was an interesting discovery for me, and it gave me a lot of confidence going forward, that actually it's a matter of context. It's about, do I know what the mission is? Do I understand the parameters? Do I know what's expected of me? And then how do I work within those parameters to bring out my natural skills, my expertise? How do I showcase that in my own, subtle, not in your face kind of way, but still showing the competence and the requirements that are needed for the occasion, that are fit for the occasion, and do that gracefully, and do that elegantly, and do that naturally without having to perform. So that has been the ongoing journey.
Jay, would you like to add?
There were so many times I got called out, and whew, sometimes I, I can recall there was a time when I was called out by the governor of Guam, and in the middle of a public event, and to talk about something, and I don't even remember what it was about, but in those moments, especially if it's a topic that you're really aware of and you've studied, then sometimes all it is just activating or getting into your mind and just pulling that information out and sharing that, right? Sharing that bit of information with the audience. So when people call you out, you just have to step back, maybe take a breath, right? And if it's on a topic you're familiar with, just pull from the information that you have and share that. And even if it's not eloquent, the fact that you've engaged, right, is going to be beneficial to you, right? Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert or an ambivert. The the core thing is, how can you communicate? Do you communicate? Do you engage? And if you're called out, well, you have to. You almost have to, because you're out there in the public and people are seeing you. And in my case, anyway. And then I've done things where, so I was a cultural activist, right? So my language is one of the languages in the world that is set to basically expire if we don't, as the speakers and indigenous people, don't continue to perpetuate it. So as a cultural activist, I wanted to share stories on a public stage, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to do it, to be very frank. But I had my taste, and when you're in a public space where you get immediate feedback from your audience, it almost emboldens that extrovert in you to come out even more. And so the next time, I was almost a theatrical event, sharing my poetry with people on a stage. And so that's why I was asking early on. My question was, do we create the environment to allow ourselves to become the ambivert or become the extrovert?
That is a great question, for which I may not have the expertise to answer it. So I'm going to lean into Serena to share her thoughts on that question.
I would say that's almost a spiritual question, like which comes first? Does the environment create you or you create the environment? And I think it's both. I think up to a point, we are shaped by our environments. We are the output, the byproduct of our upbringing, our culture, our family values, and so on. But at the point that you start becoming self-aware and you start exercising autonomy and self-agency, that's the opportunity to become your own leader, the self-leadership. And that's then the question to ask myself would be, what am I creating? Who am I becoming? Who do I want to be in this season of my life, and for what purpose? So it's very much going back to, earlier on in our conversation, we were talking about meaning and purpose and being in service to something bigger than ourselves. So in Jay's case, it's important to speak up, because otherwise the indigenous person's language may become extinct. So that is something that you can be in service to. It's way bigger than any inconvenience, any discomfort, any whatever negative feelings one may have about being in the spotlight, or being called out of hiding.
Excellent. Thank you for adding and sharing that with us. I have a question from the audience. Our friend Serena, our here's a question for you. Do you think that introverts are good at rolling their eyes?
All the time. Introverts are always rolling their eyes, whether they do it visibly or inside their minds.
It's fascinating because I would always categorize eye rolling as someone who might be smug. Their ego just doesn't have the capacity to entertain what's being talked about. So I always thought that eye rolling was more of that high energy, high touch extrovert personality whose ego just doesn't let them, doesn't let them give other people their spotlight. But now we are all, I guess, subject to our own opinions. That's how I translate or interpret eye rolling. But thanks for giving it a different perspective from an introvert's lens. I never thought that. I always, here, let me rephrase myself. I would have thought that the introvert was more the shy. I'm not going to roll my eyes. I'm not going to try to bring attention to myself to be put on the spot or put under the spotlight and be called to respond to whatever is being discussed.
Okay. I will admit that because I saw the lull at the end of Tracy's comment, that I thought I imagined that the scenario was something like, something that is being said in the discussion doesn't make sense or hasn't been properly thought out, or, here is this loud person again dominating the conversation. So from an introvert's perspective, they would be rolling their eyes in solidarity with maybe the other fellow introverts in the room who have been through this before, and this is how their meetings are run. And I can see from that perspective. But usually introverts are too polite to roll their eyes in an obvious way. They would keep it to themselves. They would mask. They would put on a very polite face. Yeah, as you say, they might even lower their heads and avoid eye contact. But mentally, I do not discount the possibility that they are rolling their eyes and going, here we go again.
Fantastic. All right, here's another question for both of you and get both your perspectives. So when I mentioned the word introvert and how we each interpret or define things differently, I want to bring in the different metaphor that, or maybe it isn't a metaphor, but let's talk about the imposter mindset. Can people unknowingly become or define themselves as introverted because they themselves have this mindset that, hey, I don't have the charisma that's necessary, or who's really going to want to listen to what I have to say?
So, America, there was so many times on camera and as an on-air personality, I didn't like to watch myself on TV. I didn't like to watch any of the stories that I did on TV. And I didn't like listening to my recordings of my own radio show. And I'll just tell you, with the radio show, it was like I would lean into the microphone and I would use my seductive voice. And it sounded like I was Batman. So I didn't like it. But it was, I'm being a little, funny about it, but really it's the comfort level that I had to get over, right? What was more important, my comfort? Because we talked about this earlier. What was more important, my comfort or the message, the impact, what it is that I was trying to convey, the message that was being put out by the story that I was sharing or that I wanted to share. And in any sort of communication, otherwise, what are you doing? What is your purpose in sharing your story? And if it's not to have an impact, right? And I'll give you another call out. LinkedIn The very fact that I'm even here was actually a call out. And I was just listening, like I was listening to a podcast, I thought, but it really was a LinkedIn live event, and it was with Annie Osung, and Annie invited me, and I just clicked on it, and I was like, oh, this is great. And they talked about trauma, and I was trying to help somebody understand that if you were in an event that caused you trauma, that this too shall pass. And how do you do that? How do you get through those things? I just shared my story as a tornado survivor. And that tornado survival story then allowed me to reach others in who had experienced the same situation and then help them tell their story. And really that was the genesis of the storytelling strategist and who I am and the book and everything. That was it. That was my origin story.
That was your debut to LinkedIn?
Absolutely. I was known as the tornado guy for like a good minute.
Serena?
Well, your question was, can people become introverted because they think they don't have charisma? So I want to take the opportunity to demystify what that even means. We have this idea that charisma has to look and sound a certain way. And usually when we think of someone who's got charisma, someone who's charismatic, we think that's the same thing as being a leader. Leaders are charismatic. The person at the front is outgoing, sociable, charming, loud. They have a certain gravitas about them, certain presence, very magnetic. People listen to them, eyes follow them when they walk through the room. Now, I think that there are different ways of being charismatic. And really, it's about how do you engage? I think what Jay's word was engage. How do you engage with the people so that you communicate at the level at which they are ready to receive your message? How do you do it such that it's relevant to them, it's attractive to them, it resonates with them? That's more important than how you present outwardly. And not everybody is going to respond well to that loud, outgoing person, because not all of us are that way inclined. Up to 50% of the population are introverted. So charisma can look different to different people. And I think when a person says, because I'm introverted or because I don't have charisma, that makes me introverted, I would say actually, when it comes to the imposter syndrome, that affects everyone, regardless of your personality. And imposter syndrome could be seen as, I'm being conscious that I'm not very competent in this area yet. Looking at the people in the room with me, I feel I'm not quite adequate. I'm not sure. I have some doubts about how much I deserve to be here, how qualified I am to be here. And that is subjective, right? Because you could be very competent, but you still have those doubts. Or you could be conscious and very aware that you are not as competent as you could be yet because you are still new in the journey. And that's not a judgment on anyone. So imposter syndrome is not necessarily a bad thing. It's the beginning of self-awareness. The question then is to interrogate that imposter syndrome and see if it's justified. Does it mean that I need to level up? Does it need to I need to upgrade my mindset, my skills, my communication? What is it that I need to do differently? Or maybe there's nothing that I need to do particularly differently. I just need to be more comfortable inside myself and express myself fully instead of holding back.
It's fantastic. It almost feels, and I say this every week when we go live, by purpose and design, I do not share my questions in advance to try to make our shows as conversational as possible. But it seems like every question that I have queued up just fits so nicely, like a puzzle piece. And the response you gave me kind of fits into the next question. Root cause therapy. Is this where we discover and define the charismatic, the everything that you just defined for us and shared with us?
So root cause Sorry.
Yeah, let's hear a little bit about the root cause therapy.
Okay, so root cause therapy is one of the modalities that are based in somatics. So that's to do with your mind-body connection, your felt sense of what is safe, what is unsafe. It's part of trauma recovery. It's helping people through a very trauma-informed lens. And when I say trauma, I don't necessarily only mean a specific incident that somebody has been a part of, like an accident. It could also be small things that have accumulated over time. And I'll give you an example. So, for instance, if someone's all through their childhood has had a parent who has been very critical, very harsh, and had very unrealistic expectations of what it means to be a good child, they may develop certain tendencies in adulthood, right? Or rather, they carry those survival mechanisms as a sort of way to survive and adapt to what was needed at the time as a child. And they carry that over into adulthood. So it could show up in the workplace, it could show up in their relationships, it shows up in the way they carry themselves socially, as maybe somebody who hides, who tries to please, tries to stay safe, tries not to be noticed because they don't want to get into trouble. And they may also become unduly perfectionistic, always setting impossible standards for themselves that to everybody else looks like more than enough, over delivering, but to them it's never good enough, because as I was just saying, just listening to a guest on my podcast interview yesterday, when you bring home a test mark of 92% and your parent asks you what happened to them, where's the missing 8%? It's little things like that. We laugh about it as adults, but as the child, depending on how that was said, whether it was said jokingly, whether it was said seriously, whether it was said in a judgmental way, that affects how that child receives and hears that message and what it means for them. So this is different from child to child, adult to adult. So a particular child who is, let's say, more sensitive, or who is going through some other challenges of their own, or the family situation is unstable at that point in time, could then take on the message that unless I am perfect, unless I always overachieve, unless I always exceed expectations, I am not good enough. So there's no separation for the child between what was said, in a throwaway moment by an adult who was under stress, versus what it means for me, for my identity in this family, for my place in this family, for my sense of belonging, my sense of safety. And so that child could then take that into adulthood as I am not good enough unless I'm constantly striving. And that is one of the recipes for burnout.
Fascinating. Now, that narrative, I'm sure we all to some degree remember or have recollection of our childhood and our academic years where we had to respond to that question. Now, in my case, and I say this, anecdotally, but my reality is I had to respond to the missing 20%. So I'd be over the moon if I had to respond towards the other 8%. But listen, it doesn't matter what percentage we were accountable to answering. You're absolutely right. That stays ingrained. It becomes part of, the trauma that we build up, and it comes. I wouldn't go as far as saying it comes to haunt us, but it comes to affect us in our adulthood. Now, let's continue with the question, because these are fitting in really nicely. You shared a great example. Are there other uncommon or common unconscious beliefs, characteristics that keep professionals from showing up fully when it comes to these behaviors that we bring along with us from our childhood?
I would say it's along the template of I'm not enough. I'm not worthy enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not qualified enough. And lots of studies have shown, right, that if a gentleman is 60% qualified for a role, he will apply for the role. If a woman, if she's not 100% able to tick off all those boxes, she will not. So there is also some gender differences there. And all these are intersecting. So it's along the lines of who I am as I am is not enough. So I need to strive more. I need to do more. I need to be more. And so it becomes an eternal chasing after some external validation, some approval, some kind of recognition, which is why for the quiet achiever, it's doubly hard, because here they are in the background. They don't want that kind of visibility. They don't want all eyes on them. But at the same time, they're also recognizing, I'm not getting seen. I'm not getting valued. I'm not getting recognized. People have no idea how much I actually know and what I'm capable of, because I am not talking about it, because I'm not making it obvious. And that's that internal conflict, wanting to be visible, but also afraid of what it means to be visible, because it goes back to that safety element I was talking about. If it doesn't feel safe for me to show up, it doesn't feel safe for me to put myself out there, this whole, I feel very exposed. I feel vulnerable. What are people going to say? What are people going to think of, say, my podcasting voice or my video or how I look? All these are the unconscious beliefs that are at the root of what keeps the quiet achiever from showing up fully.
Fascinating. And Jay, what's your perspective from a storytelling lens and perspective?
From a storytelling perspective, I think that some of the things that we grew up thinking about. So let me just put it in this way. When I was talking about storytelling, and I would have a similar show like this on LinkedIn, I would have to explain to people storytelling isn't just knights in shining armor and unicorns and rainbows. It's not the at the side of your daughter or son's bed giving them a good night kiss. That's not the storytelling we're talking about. And really, I continue to say it, but in a different way. This lately, at the core of everything that we do, storytelling, it's how we communicate at everything we do. So trying to break that mindset in people, right, that has become now my purpose. And it just kind of reinforces itself the more and more I talk about it. And so you'll find that when you find your purpose, you'll be able to either turn off or turn on the introvert or extrovert, whichever it is that you need in the moment. And I'm just talking from my personal perspective. So it's how you want to communicate that would then, to me, delineate how you communicate, either an ambivert, extrovert, sometimes ambivert, and introvert, right? I think that definitely there in storytelling, when you say the word storytelling, immediately what comes to mind isn't how we communicate.
But is that for everyone? Because I know some people, when they put pen to paper or fingers to a keyboard, it almost feels like they step into a whole different paradigm. And it just becomes like verbal diarrhea. They just let it all out. And they unconsciously, if I could use that term, become that extrovert, because they're on their own stage. They are sharing their story. They are articulating their narrative as they know how, because they're the only ones who have lived it and experienced it. And they're now putting those thoughts into writing. Pause. Are we there?
Is there anything good or bad about that? That somebody is one way and in person and another way when they are writing?
It is good and bad for whoever it is and however they define it. I touched on it earlier. I tried writing and felt that it just wasn't working for me. Now, part of that has a little bit to do with my like and dislike for learning through reading, writing. It just wasn't my ideal way of getting my message across. But for others, like look at the thousands and upon thousands of authors who are bestsellers, who are many of which are introverts, and they are successful at getting their message out.
So it sounds to me like it's a matter of identifying which is that mode of communication that works best for you, for your message. So if the introverts preferred mode is writing because it gives them time to think, to analyze, to choose their words carefully and then string them together in a way that is beautiful or elegant or impactful, then that's the mode that they choose. But I think
Mm-hmm.
what's important is also being true to yourself. As you express, this is about self expression and the integrity of that self expression. Is this way of communicating true to me? Does it communicate? Does it encapsulate my message? Does it capture what it is that I'm trying to convey to the people who are reading, who are listening? If that is in integrity, then I don't see the issue. But if it's me pretending to be something I'm not, and I'm writing in a way that's not me, and I'm pretending to be someone else, putting on a persona, at some point I'm going to give myself away. At some point I'm going to run out of steam. So I think the integrity and that internal alignment, the internal congruence is very important too.
Okay, so let's pick up on that, because I did have a question that kind of ties in really nicely with this. So, what advice would you give to introverts who want to start sharing that story but feel overwhelmed or unsure?
That is every introvert who wants to start putting themselves out there and be visible. So, my first question to them is, for what purpose? What is the reason that they want to share their story? Maybe they receive some advice from a business coach. You have to be visible, you have to share your story, you have to start vulnerable, you have to let people see who you are. So, all that is fine on the surface, but depends on how this introvert is receiving this information and what they make it mean. If they then internally think that, yes, I understand intellectually, I need to start sharing my story so people can see me, so I'm no longer the best kept secret. But at the same time, I don't feel safe sharing my story. What parts should I share? Do I have to disclose everything? I don't want people to, come into my inner world without permission. Then that's a question of how do you frame your story so that you share enough to establish rapport and trust with people who don't know you, but also maintain your own privacy. So that's again skills and competencies. How do you set those boundaries? How do you decide what's enough, what's too much, and so on? And that is something we learn over time. We don't learn it all at once. It's also how ready am I to learn this thing. So it may take me a few months, it may take me a few years to get to that sweet spot where I can say, this is my story, and I've curated the story in such a way that I feel safe telling it, and it's true for me, and it serves the purpose of what it is that I intend to do in sharing the story.
Fantastic. All right. So, I know we are at the top of the hour and I want to respect everyone's time. So, why don't we dive into and bring this show home? You have started the Visible Introvert Academy. What can you tell us about your academy? You already touched on it earlier, who you help, but let's hear a little bit more about the Visible Introvert Academy. What inspired you to create this, and what transformation do you see for your students?
I would say I created it for myself, for that past version of me who felt invisible and who, when I was just starting out in my business, had no clue how to put myself out there and be seen and start engaging with people and actually get on people's radar. So this is for every quiet achiever who wants to be seen for the right reason, not just for ego, not just for the spotlight, but for a purpose. And so for the person who is thinking of starting a business, that's to do with how do I put myself out there on social media? How do I go to networking events, have those conversations and start expanding my network and actually connect with people in a meaningful way? And then for the leader in the corporate space, that's about how do I get noticed so that I'm no longer just a quiet achiever. I'm also seen as leadership potential. How do I communicate differently? How do I set boundaries? How do I speak so that I'm no longer just seen as this person who does good work in the background, but actually someone who has great ideas, not afraid to share those ideas, has a way of galvanizing people together, is great at collaborating with others, and I can see this person as a leader. So that's what it's for, and it's a online program. It's over 12 weeks. So that's what inspired me to create it. And the transformation, to answer your question, is that someone who is a leader at work and an introvert as well is now volunteering to do presentations, when previously they would like, don't call me, don't call me. And now they are also able to see their own strengths. So they used to think I'm not good enough as a leader because I'm not charismatic, I'm not extrovert, and all the rest of it. But I am now recognizing my own strengths as an introverted leader, that I have the ability to bring out the best in my team through kindness, through empathy, through listening. And my team are telling me that they feel really supported by me, they feel encouraged by me, they feel safe with me being the supervisor. And also, I give other people the opportunity to step into the spotlight, and it doesn't make me feel threatened in any way, because as a quiet achiever, as an introvert, I love helping other people shine. I don't always need to be number one. Sometimes I'm happy to be number two and sponsor or facilitate someone else on my team getting that moment in the spotlight. And that is a huge difference for someone who has been hiding in the background all this time and wanting to be noticed, but not at the same time, not really trying very much to be noticed. And that is one of the most, I guess, dramatic examples I can give you.
Fantastic. So we had some really good conversations. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer the questions. We had quite an abundance, and I'm so grateful and thankful for those who RSVP'd to this event. I'm looking at people who have joined us throughout the show, who are still here with us live. And if you're an introvert, or characterize yourself, or heard something today that resonates, and you want to get a hold of Serena, how can people get a hold of you?
The best way would be on my LinkedIn. I'm very active there. I post almost every day. So yeah, connect with me there. Let's have a conversation.
All right. And if you haven't taken the time to listen to the Quiet Warrior podcast, the QR code up on the screen would take you to her latest episode. Feel free to listen, download it, and to follow Serena and her guests and conversations on the Quiet Warrior podcast. Jay, how can people get a hold of you?
The same way, actually. I'm on LinkedIn as well. As you can see, we're here. I'm active in the comments there. So that's one way. The other way is through my website, www.ruleyourstory.com. And it's just the different ways there that I am able to help people communicate. I do have my book there as well. You can click on the link and it'll take you to my book, The Rules of Engagement in Storytelling.
All right. I promise you next week I will have your QR code for your book. I think the last time I used the QR code, I used the Canadian Amazon hyperlink. And I'll have to find the US link to embed a QR code, because people are scanning Serena's QR code. So thank you for those who are doing that, and will consume her content in her podcast. And if you want to reach out, as she mentioned, she is available and most active on LinkedIn. I'm going to wrap things up. Once again, my name is Americo DaCosta, coach and producer of live streams and on-demand digital experiences. You can find me as well on LinkedIn. For the most part, I am looking and building a community on Substack. And the replays can also be found on YouTube. You can replay this episode, listen to the entire playlist of the Storytelling Journey conversations and past guests. But for now, I want to thank everyone who has joined us, been part of the conversation, and for those who will enjoy the replay. Bye for now, and until next time.